Hello, this is Danny Raymond, the voice behind Ray's Guide. Today, for April Fools, or rather Triggerfish as it's called in the verse, CIG had a behind-the-ships video for the Hull B, as in Bumblebee. It was a bit reminiscent of the Origin 404, which turned people around for a stealth ship that was completely invisible. But part of the joke was that when the actual 400 came out, measurements were made, and it was the actual geometry was the event Origin 400, just with all materials set to transparent. Taken from it as a hint to what the actual Hull B will be next week, right? Right? Well, maybe if we look critically, some things might emerge. Because one thing that is evident is that this video was worked on either simultaneously or after the actual Hull B introduction video, advertisement, and sizzle reel that we will see next week. Why do I say that? Because at the end, Jared jokes that the actual Hull B behind the ships video will be shorter. The only way to be able to say that was that the actual Hull B video was either in the can or so far into final edit that the run length was certain. But this is all just a joke, right? Yes, so look at the parts that weren't part of the joke. Look at the things that were part of the setup. Also, things that weren't necessary for the joke. The video starts off talking about an issue that fans had pointed out literally from the start of the concept sale of the Hull B. And that was the promise that the Hull B being able to land when loaded, and that the concept art of the Hull B landed and loaded were incompatible. And right away, fans came up with ideas about how to do it. And they pretty much boiled down to two approaches. Make the Hull B have saddlebag layout in an enlarged version of how it's done on the Hull A, or to keep the cruciform arrangement of the Hull C and twist it somehow to get access to the ground, which they described when they first teased that they were working on the Hull B again, and which they confirmed in this video that that is the way that they are going to go. They also stated in this video that the one big plus of the Hull B would be the ability to use the very efficient 32 SCU boxes, which I frankly assumed was the case since they said the capacity would be increased from 384 to 512 SCU. But let's crunch the numbers. 512 divided by 4 spindles makes for 128 SCU per spindle, and that means 4 crates per spindle, or a grid layout of 4 by 8 by 4 SCU. By the way, the spindles shown in the April Fool's video show 6 containers per grid, not 4, so those can't be real. But the body itself, for most of the other joke hulls, they reused Hull C's or A's, but this is a completely different one, and about the right size. Would they really go to the work of doing a whole new ship frame to this level of detail just for a Triggerfish video? Lose the antenna and the stinger on the rear, of course, and substitute some real landing gear for the tiny bug-like ones, and we might very well be looking at the real Hull B profile here. So let's talk about what else might be different. Back when they announced the new 512 SCU capacity and X-arranged spindles, I asked whether that was going to require a much bigger ship than the promised envelope of the Hull B. So I did a proof of concept model, and what I found was that if they kept the spindles close, they could easily fit within the original Hull B dimension specifications. Not only that, they had to keep the spindles close in for any Hull B design to work. If you let the spindles spread out, then the center point just keeps getting higher and higher above the ground, and it gets harder and harder to get the ship to reach all the way to the ground. I explored 2 ways of letting the ship reach all the way to the ground in the proof of concept. In the front, I used a tall piston landing gear, and in the rear, I gave the ship a tall aspect ratio like a fish. If the tall piston gear looked a bit silly, realize that you could make the gear have 2 height positions for the piston, a lower one for when the grids are retracted, and a tall one where the grids are extended. Now, you might notice that in a departure from the rest of the Hull series, my proof of concept included wheeled gear. But if you're wondering about that choice, think of what you ought to be hearing when you switch a Hull A from extended to retracted while in a hangar. You ought to be hearing a terrible scraping metal sound as the pads are pushed across the floor under thousands of kilograms of pressure. But not with wheels, see? The other thing that I had to decide on with my proof of concept is whether the hull B would be designed like the hull A, in which the rear section was not accessible by the crew, or whether it would be like the hull C, where the central spindle was a tunnel able to connect front and rear. In my proof of concept, I made them connected and in fact gave the engineer a full living suite in addition to access to all the components back there. But when you look at these busy bees, you see the length behind the cargo is small, too small to contain living spaces. So it presumes a layout like the hull A, everything in the front. And then there's one other thing that might represent a feature of the hull B. In the April Fool's video, they talk about the grids being able to rotate. But being able to rotate isn't part of the joke. The joke is about them flapping, not about them rotating. So why include the ability to rotate? Maybe because they will. Returning to the proof of concept, you see that the crates that are in what I might call the upper V are not easily seen or reached from the ground with a true Holder Max lift tractor beam. My solution was to include a remote tractor turret on the top nacelle. Another route I studied was to have a lift that could go all the way to the roof like the one on the Corsair. You could then just climb up onto the roof and have a good view of the upper cargo V and down over the edge to the ground. But a somewhat more unique solution would be to have the spindles be able to be rotated, either around the center for each individual spindle, or perhaps all at once in kind of a rotisserie fashion, although that would require the landing gear on the ship to be a little bit taller than my proof of concept. Also, you could be sure that if the hull B gets a rotisserie cargo spindles, the hull C and larger owners will be demanding an upgrade. I could go further on with what I discovered doing the proof of concept, but with the real McCoy coming just next week, there's not much reason to not just wait. Depending on other details and the price, I anticipate that the hull B will be quite a popular choice for pure hauling players wanting more than the raft and less than the hull C. On to my channel events I have for the captain members, the VRU at CitizenCon, where one of the captains will be awarded a VR headset, with the value of the headset being based on the number of captain member months until then. So you may want to join or upgrade your membership. Then for everyone else, my Grow the Channel ship giveaways. For the ILW week, really not that far away, I'll be giving away an Ironclad Assault, which by all indications will be going flyable right about then. And then for the IAE week, the Galaxy, which has already been teased as the big new ship for this year's IAE. One entry per video for each of these members. As always, you're entered automatically. Everyone else just subscribe and comment with a secret word. And the secret word for this video is what I did differently with the landing gear on my hull B concept. Fly safe, keep it real, and I'll see you in the verse. This is Danny Raymond with Ray's Guide.